Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this RSK Technical Talk. Today, our webinar is on Legionella and the risks and responsibilities. There's a couple of housekeeping notes to mention. So all of your microphones are automatically muted, so no need to scurry around and make sure they're off. They already will be. There'll be a Q&A session towards the end where you will be able to ask or type in your questions into a chat format, and we can have a look at answering these. We'll aim to get through as many as we can. However, anything that we have not been able to get around to, we can follow up after the webinar. There'll be a short survey that will be sent to you after the webinar is finished. If you could all fill this survey in where possible, it allows us to act on the feedback and ensure these webinars only get better going forward. So just a quick introduction. So my name is Rhys Hatherall, and I'm the business unit lead for MSS Water, part of the RSK Group. And I've been in the industry for 4 years now. And today, delivering the technical talk is James Hopkins, who is our Senior Key Account Manager for MSS Water. And James has been in the industry for over a decade now. So without further ado, I'll now hand you over to James, who will get started on the technical talk.
Thank you very much for that, Rhys. As Rhys mentioned, I'm James Hopkins. We'll start going through the slides now. So the agenda of what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be looking at a brief overview of Legionella. We'll be talking about the chain of infection, how you actually catch this disease, the legal obligations that you'll have as a premises or duty holder, and we'll look at competency, control measures for controlling the bacteria, and then, as Rhys mentioned, a short little Q&A. Brilliant. So first of all, an overview of Legionella bacteria, what it is. So Legionella bacteria is single cell bacteria around about 3 to 6 microns in length. And to put that into perspective, human hair is around about 50 microns in length. So you will never see this bacteria to the naked eye, and neither will you see the aerosols or water droplets it contains. So this bacteria is present in naturally occurring water sources, such as rivers and lakes and things. It can be present in the mains incoming water to your building. The optimal growth temperature for this bacteria is 37 degrees C, and that should sort of note to you why it is such a dangerous bacteria, as body temperature is 37 degrees C. Below 20 degrees C, the bacteria is considered dormant or goes into hibernation, but is not killed off. Above 50 degrees C, the bacteria begins to die off, and it's all about time and temperature there. So 60 degrees C, it's roughly killed within 2 minutes, and at 70 degrees C, it's considered an instant kill then. So as the bacteria is a living organism, it does need a nutrient source to survive and multiply. That can be anything from scales, silt, sediment, organic matter, numerous different sources. Even things like ferric iron or rust can increase the growth rate of the bacteria. It also favors stagnant water to multiply, so it likes a nice home for it to grow in. The growth period is roughly 2 to 10 days or 7 days on average. And the infection or Legionnaire's disease is caused by inhaling water aerosols or droplets containing this bacteria. So you'd have a water source or an aerosol containing this bacteria, you'd breathe that in, and that's where you'd catch the infection then in your lungs. So as we mentioned, there's a few different growth factors that affects the growth of the bacteria. The first thing, again, being a living organism, it does need a water source. The next one is, as we mentioned, nutrients. So it does need a food source for it to live and reproduce. The next one we talk about is stagnation, for that nice stable home for it to grow and multiply. And then finally, as we discussed, temperature then. So below 20 is dormant, above 50 starts to die off. Ideal growth temperature is body temperature, 37 degrees C. So what this bacteria can cause, Legionnaire's disease, very much like flu symptoms. So come on within 5 to 10 days of inhaling this bacteria. As I mentioned, flu-like symptoms, so cough, fever, aches, pains, headache, diarrhea and vomiting, those types of symptoms. Very much pneumonia as well is one of the issues it can cause. So basically your immune system or your white blood cells will try and attack this bacteria in your lungs. And as a result of that, you'll get fluid buildup or pneumonia-like symptoms. Other diseases it can cause is such as Pontiac fever, and it can also cause death as a result of organ failure. And it's roughly a 12% average in the UK. So some people are more susceptible to catching this disease than others. And the people who are most at risk are the older generation, people age 50 plus. Males over females in a ratio of 3 to 1. We often joke in the industry that males suffer more from man flu and those types of things, but we're not sure the exact research why males are more affected. Anyone who is a smoker, those with underlying health conditions or any respiratory diseases, asthma, those types of things, heavy drinkers, chronic respiratory or kidney disease sufferers, and those that are immunosuppressed. So anybody going through treatment in hospitals that lowers your immune system are more likely to catch this, which is why there are such more stringent control measures when you come to hospital environments and care homes and those types of places. Well, so the next thing we're going to talk through is the chain of infection. So this is all the conditions that are needed for you to catch Legionnaire's disease. So we talk about this as in CATES. So you'll see contamination, amplification, transmission, exposure, and susceptibility. So the first thing you need is the contamination of water at source. So this in the commercial premises is going to be coming in with your mains water. So it will be present in low numbers in the incoming mains water to your building. The next thing then we talk about is amplification of the bacteria, or quite simply put, growth of the bacteria. And that is where all those conditions that we talk about that the bacteria needs to reproduce and increase in numbers are present. So the temperature, stagnation, and food source. So that bacteria will then start to reproduce and grow to high numbers. The next thing we talk about is transmission of breathable droplets. So that you've now got a water source containing the bacteria. The next thing we need are these breathable droplets, or quite often referred to as aerosols. So these aerosols will quite often be invisible to the naked eye again. And finally, the last two steps we talk about is the exposure to those aerosols containing the bacteria. So why we put such emphasis on showers and anything that creates those spray type devices, you can imagine in a shower, you're going to be in there 5 to 10 minutes. You can have the shower spray directly into your face. You're going to be exposed for a long period of time. So you will see that there's quite a lot of emphasis put onto showers in commercial buildings. And then finally, you need people who are susceptible to the infection. Again, we talked about hospitals having more stringent control measures. So we're going to cover a little bit about the legal obligations. This is aimed to the legal obligations in the UK, so apologies for anyone who's joined from abroad. The first law you'll find in the UK is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. So this is law in the UK, and if you were to be prosecuted for being negligent or not complying with the guidelines, you would be prosecuted under this Health and Safety at Work Act. The next law then that we have in the UK is COSH, which is the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. And Legionella will fall under this law because it is a substance that's hazardous to health, basically. Then we come on to two sort of areas then which are specifically related to Legionella bacteria. That is ACOP L8, which is the approved code of practice. Now, this isn't necessarily law, but if you comply with everything in these regulations, you will be complying with the COSH law. So the ACOP L8 tells you what you need to do to comply with Legionella control. And then you'll have various other technical documents and guidance, such as HSG 274, which basically tells you how you comply with the ACOP L8, and it gives you specific control measures and more detailed technical guidance. We have things like HTM04, which is all about Legionella control in hospital settings, and various different British standard documents, which goes more into depth about sampling, risk assessments, disinfections, those types of things. Okay, so some of the roles that you'll see terms for the roles bandied about in Legionella control. The first one is duty holder. So this is pretty much the most senior person within an organization or landlord of a premise. And they are the person that is ultimately responsible for health and safety of a company. So a duty holder has several responsibilities when it comes to Legionnaire's disease. And this little document pictured here on the right is a HSE produced document. It's called a brief guide for duty holders. It's a 5-page document, and it just clearly and briefly goes over what your responsibilities are as a duty holder. So I will refer to that in a link towards the end of the presentation if you'd like to read in more detail. The next role we talk about is a responsible person. So the responsible person is appointed by the duty holder to take the day-to-day charge of responsibility for Legionella control on the premise. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth later on in the presentation, but anybody can be appointed as a responsible person. They just must have the competence, the knowledge, authority, skills, training, etc., to be able to perform. They ultimately, when we talk about things like authority, if there was a Legionella issue on your site, they must have the authority to act on that. They must have the financial approval and budgets to be able to take action on whatever is recommended. So here's a phrase that I quite like here when we talk about who's in charge of Legionella control on premises and whatnot. Responsibility can be delegated, but liability or accountability cannot. And so what we talk about there is if you're using a contractor to provide some of the services for Legionella control on your site, you are still liable to check that they are performing those tasks correctly, and ultimately that liability still lies with you. So how that would look as in terms of an organization of risk management scheme of control for Legionella compliance is this person at the top. We talked about a duty holder. The person is ultimately responsible for a premises. Underneath them, you'd have then an appointed responsible person to take charge of the day-to-day implementation of that scheme of control. They should ideally have a deputy responsible person, which will cover them in terms of absence, illness, or holidays. And then more than likely, you're going to have support from an engineering team, subcontractors to actually perform some of those tasks to control the Legionella bacteria. So the responsible person will be in charge of some of these tasks we talk about here. So that there must be clear policies and procedures, things like a written scheme for your premises, which outlines how you control your Legionella bacteria. There must be clear allocation of responsibilities. So if you were using a company such as MSS Water to provide some of your Legionella control tasks, it must be clearly defined in a scope of works. The responsible person would detail control measures, the testing and inspection, the frequencies of those tasks that are being performed, any actions required affecting the control, and they must keep all of those records and test results for a period of 5 years. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to briefly just touch upon competency next. So the responsible person, we did briefly touch upon it, but they must have a good knowledge of the installation. So they must understand the water systems and the risk areas within those premises. They are in charge of the day-to-day implementation of the written scheme, so the tasks that are being performed. You must oversee any monitoring and inspection, so they must have all the results from those. Maintain those records for a period of 5 years. Ensure that there's good lines of communication where any risks is communicated to the workforce and to the duty holders. Manage any remedial actions that may be highlighted from the back of a risk assessment or the control measures. And finally, they must ensure the competency of anybody dealing with the Legionella control on site. So whether that be training records and that type of thing. When we talk about employing a contractor such as MSS Water to provide some of these Legionella control tasks on your site, one of the good ways to check whether that company is able to provide those services is a governing body such as the Legionella Control Association. So they are a governing body which will basically keep a list of all service providers in the industry. When you sign up to the Legionella Control Association, you will detail what tasks you're able to perform, whether it's hot and cold temperature monitoring, disinfection, Legionella risk assessments, sampling, that type of thing. And there will be a register of all companies and what services they have signed up for. As a part of this Legionella Control Association, then, those companies will be audited once a year, where they'll go through their records, policies, procedures, and method statements, that type of thing, to ensure that the systems they have in place for providing these services are in line with Legionella control guidance and compliance. So the website is just on the bottom of the screen here, legionellacontrol.org.uk. So it's a good way of checking the competency of any contractors you may be bringing into your company to help you provide the Legionella compliance. Okay, so the next slides we're going to talk about is control measures. So what you can actually do to control this Legionella bacteria. Normally, when we run these Legionella awareness courses, they would be anywhere between half a day to 2 days, depending on the level of depth that we're going into. We're obviously constricted a little bit with time here on this presentation. So I will try and cover this to the best of our ability, but if there's any specific questions, we can go through this at the end. Now, the documents I referred to earlier in the presentation, the ACOP L8, which basically says what you must do to comply with Legionella control on your site. And then these 3 other documents, HSG 274 parts 1, 2, and 3, tell you how you comply with that ACOP L8. So they are very lengthy documents. They go into detail about different types of water systems, the control measures you apply, what to do in the event of an outbreak, sample results. They cover everything in depth. It's pretty much our Bible. So that's broken down into 3 parts, this document. Part 1 covers evaporative cooling systems, or what you might call cooling towers. Part 2 covers the control of Legionella bacteria in hot and cold water systems, or what I would call a domestic system. So that's your hot and cold taps, water heaters, cold water storage tanks, that type of thing. So you would find those in most premises. They're bound to have toilets and hand washing facilities, that type of thing. And then the 3rd part of that document is the control of Legionella bacteria in other risk systems. So that document would cover things like spa pools, spray mist systems, emergency showers. It's very much quite a short document and doesn't go into a lot of detail and puts a lot of emphasis on having a Legionella risk assessment performed by competent persons to see what control measures can be implemented on those other risk systems. But other risk systems will pretty much cover anything that's not a cooling tower or hot and cold water taps that contains water and has the risk of Legionella bacteria. So in this presentation, we are focusing mainly on hot and cold water systems. So this is part 2 of the guidance. And I put a little screenshot here on the left-hand side of the bottom of the screen, which is table 2.1 taken from HSG 274 part 2. And what that table does is it splits out all of the assets that you are likely to find in a hot and cold water system for a premises. As you might be able to see, the first section there is clarifiers, goes down with hot water services, and then point of use water heaters. The next column along will be the action to take. So that will detail all of the tasks that we're talking about for that asset. And then finally, the column on the right will be the frequency that task needs to be performed. So when we're talking about a Legionella control scheme on a site, I'd expect the tasks or services to be in line with this document or guidance. When we're talking about those control measures, I think for part 2, it's roughly 3 pages long, covering all the different assets and the types of tasks. In order to condense this down for the purposes of this presentation, I've split out some of the control measures into these categories on the screen here. So as I said, we don't have enough time to cover everything, but briefly talk about these different types of control measures that you can employ. So the first one being temperature. As we mentioned earlier, that's one of the growth factors for Legionella bacteria. We're avoiding anywhere between 20 and 50 degrees C, which is the growth range for Legionella. So cold taps normally have to be less than 20 degrees C within 2 minutes. Hot taps have to be greater than 50 degrees C within 1 minute in a normal premises. And then any large volume water heaters would be storing water at greater than 60 degrees C. And the return from the recirculating hot water going back into that water heater would normally be 50 degrees C or greater than 55 degrees C in a hospital setting. And that's just to ensure that we're avoiding that, that risk temperature range throughout the whole water system in your premises. The next thing we talked about, stagnation. So the types of control measures you'd see under here is like weekly flushing of little used outlets. And so a little used outlet is any tap or outlet that is not used in the course of a week. So you would flush those for predetermined, well, not predetermined, but you would flush those until you've turned over all of the water in that pipework. What you'll see some companies stating that an outlet should be flushed for 2 to 5 minutes. There's no set time or predetermined time for flushing these outlets. It should be flushed based on temperature. So you can imagine if you had a 30-meter long length of pipework with a tap at the end that rarely gets used, turning that tap on for 2 minutes may not be enough to pull through fresh water into that supply pipework. So that's why when you're performing the weekly flushing, it should be flushed according to temperature. So you should flush that tap until the temperature is comparable to the source water. So if it's a cold tap, you should flush it until you're achieving the mains cold water incoming temperature. The other things we talk about stagnation is things like ensuring cold water storage tanks are appropriate size. So cold water storage tank for a premises should turn over all of the water in that tank within a 24-hour period. And there is something you can do. There's like a drop test or a turnover test that you can do to ensure that they are, appropriately sized. You will see in the past there's several premises that have downsized their workforce or not using all of the building in the system. So that cold water storage tank may have been designed for a much larger occupancy of that building. Next thing we talk about is inspections. So there's various different types of inspections that are done as a part of the Legionella control scheme. The first one would be things like cold water storage tank inspections, as we talked about earlier, making sure that they're just free from any nutrient sources, silt, sediment. There's no signs of bacterial growth. They're compliant with water regulations, and that they're fit for purpose. Others would be things like clarifiers or large volume water heaters should be inspected to ensure that they are free from scale or any nutrient sources, that type of thing. The next one we talk about is descaling. So scale is quite simply lime scale or calcium and magnesium salts that precipitate out. You may be familiar with this in your kettle in your house, seeing that white or cream type substance building up on your heating elements. So limescale is not only a nutrient for Legionella bacteria, but it is also a place for the Legionella bacteria to grow sort of within. So there's a heavy emphasis on descaling any outlets and shower heads and anything that creates an aerosol risk to minimize that. And that is done on a quarterly basis. The next control measure that we can talk about is disinfection. So disinfection can come in several forms, whether it's thermal or whether it's chemical, various different types of biocides that you can use to perform that. So disinfection is normally used where temperatures are failing. If your cold water storage tank inspection deems that a clean is necessary, anytime you enter a water system, anytime you would install new pipework or fittings, a Legionella risk assessment sort of dictates it. You would look at doing a disinfection. The next one, sampling. So providing that your temperature control scheme, there's sort of not really a need for sampling, but I would heavily recommend it. It's the only way to determine if there's Legionnaires bacteria or Legionella bacteria within your water system. You can also do sampling for other types of bacteria, which is often done at the same time, but it's the only surefire way to pinpoint any problem areas or if there's Legionella bacteria in your system. It's also recommended if you're struggling with your temperatures or your disinfection measures and things like that to prove that that is effective. The next thing we're going to look at is materials. So it's very important that only approved materials are used within a plumbing system or hot and cold water services. And there are approval schemes such as RSK, which is the Water Regulations Advisory Service, which will keep a register of all fittings and materials used on a plumbing system to ensure they're compliant. So it's very important that whenever you're having alterations done to your system, that you're using a good reputable plumber and they are using fittings that are approved by a service like this. And the final one, quite often overlooked in things and is a legal obligation of the duty holder, is risk assessments. So a risk assessment is when a Legionella risk assessor will come to your premises. They will survey the whole system, look through your records, your training, your competency, your test results, everything. And they will produce a report for you detailing where the high-risk areas are. In that report, you will expect to find an executive summary, so a sort of an overview of your system, an asset register of everything contained within that building. And then finally, one of the most important parts is the remedial actions. So you will find a log in there of recommended actions that you can take to improve the Legionella control on your site. Things like removal of dead legs, TMVs, whether they're needed or not, thermostatic mixing valves. It could be various different actions. So it's important that they are regularly reviewed and signed off when completed. Previously, a risk assessment was recommended to be done every 2 years. That sort of requirement or recommendation has been removed now, and it should be a live working document. So the risk assessment should be updated as and when the people or the process or your water systems change. So anytime there's a change to your Legionella control program or your water systems are changing on site, you should have that risk assessment updated. Finally, some of the regulations or guidance that we talked about earlier in this presentation, I just put a couple of the useful links here, mainly from the HSE, so you can be assured that this guidance is relevant and accurate. The first one is just the Legionella landing page for the HSE, where you can find the following relevant documents underneath listed. The next link is that brief guide for duty holders. So if you are worried about being a duty holder in a premise and you're not sure what your obligations or duties are, that document is very much recommended. As I mentioned, it's only a 5-page document, quite brief and to the point. The next one I've listed down there is HSG 274. So that's parts 1, 2, and 3. Those are the documents that detail how you or what you must do in order to comply with the ACOP L8 and the cost regulations. The next one is ACOP L8. So that is basically what you must do in order to comply with the cost regulations. And then the final one that I've put down there is if you are using any contractors to help you perform some of your Legionella control scheme, is the Legionella Control Association, where you can check out those contractors have the competence and systems in place in order to provide those. Brilliant. So I'll just hand back over to Reese now.
And I'm back. Okay, guys, so we'll just kick off with some questions then. So I'll read through from the chat. So first one on you, James. So during hot summer months, my site struggles with cold tap temperatures. The incoming mains is often above 20 degrees. What can I do? James, you're muted.
Thanks for that, Reese. So this is quite often a problem area, and not that we have many heat waves in the UK, but when we do, lots of companies will struggle with this. So within England and Wales, water boards are only guaranteed to provide you with mains incoming water less than 25 degrees, but the regulations state that cold taps have to be less than 20 degrees within 2 minutes. So there's that 5-degree difference there, and it's sort of a grey area. But one of the things that you can do is increase your flushing regime to ensure that there's no stagnation, which will be impacting the Legionella growth there. So there's nothing you can do about that cold water temperature. I'd very much recommend increasing your flushing regime during those hot periods in order to turn over that water. And if you have any further doubt apart from that, you could always do a round of sampling to ensure that those control measures are effective. Hopefully I've answered that one for you.
Perfect, thank you. So we've had another one, not so much Legionella specific, but do MSS Water operate in only domestic properties?
No, so I'm an environmental chemist by trade. We operate in commercial properties, healthcare settings, pretty much anywhere. We have the competent skills to be able to provide those services. My background is very much focused on evaporative cooling systems, but also domestic control. So if there are any specific questions relating to, non-domestic properties or any other types of environment, feel free to reach out to me. My details are on the screen there.
Wherever there's water.
Yeah, basically, wherever there's water, we will go.
Are MSS able to assist with chemical provision?
Yes, so we supply a range of different types of biocides, corrosion inhibitors, many different types of chemicals. So as I mentioned, I do have that environmental chemist background. If there are any specific chemicals you're looking to source, or if you'd like any advice on the appropriate biocides and dosage rates, that type of thing, again, feel free to reach out with me with the specifics, and I can look into that in further detail for you.
Perfect. Do MSS undertake work on cooling towers?
Yeah, so it's probably the same sort of question that was asked earlier. Yeah, I'm more than happy to go through any sort of issues you may be having, or if you'd like site surveys and things like that. If you have any specific questions relating to cooling towers, there's the HSG 274 Part 1 document. As I mentioned, they are quite lengthy documents. If you don't have that background in water treatment or Legionella control, it can be a little bit complicated to understand. That's why companies like ourselves and why I'm here is to help you navigate through that and hopefully explain to you what your sort of your obligations are in terms of the cooling tower. It's probably something we might cover in another webinar at some point where we specifically cover cooling towers.
Fantastic. Okay, another one. So to clarify, is the first step in the process the risk assessment? Do MSS provide this nationwide?
Yes, we do. So very much so, the duty holders, one of their main responsibilities is to get a Legionella risk assessment done. If you're taking over a new premises, you'd like to think that you were handed the previous Legionella risk assessment. But again, that does quantify that people are changing, so the risk assessment should be revised and updated. So it's very much the first point of call to start with that, where you have a team of qualified risk assessors that risk assess to the British standard for the Legionella risk assessments, and we can provide those nationwide. So again, any inquiries, feel free to reach out to us and we'll see how we can assist.
Okay, next one. So I've had dead legs picked up on my Legionella risk assessment, which I consider to be small. Are they essential to be removed?
Sure. So I think probably most people who are in charge of a premises will understand what a dead leg is. But a dead leg is basically a piece of pipework that's been cut off or capped off when there's services that have been changed. Or sometimes you might have a piece of pipework that's installed to allow for something to be installed in the future. Basically, in a nutshell, what it is a area of low flow. So it's a piece of pipework, anything that is twice the length of the diameter of the pipe would be counted as a dead leg. So even a small little stub would be counted as a dead leg. The reason why they are high risk is, as you can imagine, stagnation in there, the temperatures, nutrient sources can all build up within that area of low flow within that dead leg. So it's quite often something that's commonly picked up in a Legionella risk assessment with it being alterations to the plumbing systems. And yes, they should be removed because they're an area of stagnation. Ideally, they should be cut back where the T-piece is joining that little dead leg. The T-piece should be removed and you should have a straight flow through connector to avoid any stagnation. But in the worst case scenario, should be cut back as far as possible to that T-piece. As I mentioned, anything twice the length of the diameter is considered a dead leg.
Fantastic. As MSS Water, do you provide a start to finish service, for instance, starting with risk assessments and then completing remedials?
Absolutely. So I think I've worked for various companies in my time, in my 14-year career. And one of the things I really like about this as MSS Water is we do have a team of qualified plumbers in order to provide some of these Legionella risk assessment remedials. So we can do everything from the risk assessment at the start to the hot and cold temperature monitoring of Legionella compliance, the disinfections, the sampling, providing plumbers to do things like RPZ servicing even. We really can provide that whole service from start to finish. So again, feel free to reach out.
I think this might be from the same one, same person. Do MSS provide Legionella training, and is this accredited?
Yes, so we do provide accredited training. I will have to double check, but there's several accreditation schemes. We can do basic Legionella awareness, or we can do more in-depth accredited courses as well. So really depends what your role is within a Legionella compliance scheme, whether you have any high-risk items such as cooling towers, to the level of training that we would recommend for you then.
We operate in a heavy industry. What experience do MSS have in this environment?
So we operate in steelworks, that type of thing. Nuclear as well. So within the heavy industry, there's obviously sort of different intricacies that come up within heavy industry, depending on what you're manufacturing or what the industry is. But absolutely, we operate in all types of industry, from hospital to healthcare environments to universities and schools and colleges to steelworks, nuclear power, pretty much anywhere, including healthcare environments as
well. Next one then, do I have to disinfect my water system?
So that's very much an ambiguous question. So the disinfection is recommended if your temperatures are failing, consistently failing. If you've had alterations to your pipework, so if you're cutting into your water system to install a new tap or sink or outlet or anything like that, that leg of pipework should be disinfected. If your inspections of your cold water storage tank or anything like that is necessitating the need to clean that tank, and you will be entering it, you should be doing the post-disinfection after entering it. Sometimes you do a pre-disinfection if there's a risk of Legionella. If you've had any sample results that are coming back elevated or high or positive Legionella, it's sometimes recommended in those scenarios, depending on the nature of it. So in a nutshell, it's all dependent on the tasks and results that you're getting and the scenario.
Okay, so moving on to the next one. So I've had a complaint before from staff members when the hot taps are above 50 degrees. What would you advise?
So again, the legislation or guidance states that hot taps have to be greater than 50 degrees C within 1 minute, and that's to control the microbiological counts within that hot water system. The problem being, and I do get this from many of my customers, that they will get complaints from certain individuals saying that the hot tap is too hot for washing hands. Now, with body temperature being 37 degrees C, and anything being over around about 43, 44, depending on the individual, will feel hot because it's hotter than our body temperature. So the issue then comes is 50 degrees C is too hot. What can you do about that? There's two sort of main recommendations that I'd have. The best one would be to install mixer taps. So that would allow you to have hot water only, cold water only, or a blend in the middle. So I'd very much recommend those because you can have either or, and there's not so much maintenance required on those. Or something else you might see a lot in the industry, especially in the healthcare environments or people who are more susceptible to scald risks and things like that, is what's called a TMV or a thermostatic mixing valve. What they do is they blend the hot and cold water to a predetermined temperature set by the valve, so that the hot coming out of the tap is anywhere from 38 to 44 degrees, depending on what it's set to. The problem with the TMVs is they require annual maintenance. So, and in hospital environments, 6 monthly, but they require to be checked that they are operating correctly and the temperature of the water they're providing is correct. And then they also require the strainers, which are on the hot and the cold inlet to the mixing valve, to be inspected and descaled and disinfected on a periodic basis. So the TMVs are a way to mitigate any scald risks or complaints, but they do come with their own maintenance problems. And for me, the simplest way is a mixer tap will allow you. Obviously, it all depends on the scenario and setting and the end users of those taps to see whether that would be appropriate for your organization. Hopefully that's answered that.
Okay, so we are coming up towards the end of the webinar now, and there's not been any more questions as it stands. So I just want to say thank you for everyone who's joined today. Obviously, our details are up on the screen at the moment. So if there's anything that you want to ask us later on, if there's a question that you've thought of after this webinar, please get in contact with us. And obviously, if there's anything that we can just help with in terms of your businesses, please just don't hesitate to get in touch and we'll help out as much as we can.
Yeah, happy to take a call anytime, guys. Informal chats and things, more than welcome. Pick my brain anytime you want.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys.